Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where you can be, belong, and become the very best version of yourselves. So, wherever you are joining us from, whether you're driving to work, sitting at home on the couch, wherever you're joining us, we just want to say we are so thankful that you are on this journey with us. So again, if you are continuing to support us financially, right down below is the link. If you want to continue sharing these videos, bookmarking them, anytime you want to know when the newest one comes up, hit that subscribe button. All the links are right there below. So we have continued moving through this powerful book, Genesis. And we understand, again, Genesis is not a history book, right? It's not written to give you a bunch of dates and times that are historically perfect and sound. No, not the point of writing this book, Genesis. And when I say writing, I should say compiling. Because again, the book of Genesis is really a compilation of years and years and years of stories, right? Epic stories, years and years of poetry, years and years of advice given by leaders and warnings and wisdom tellings, all of it. That's what Genesis is and was to those people. And we have to remember Genesis, again, is a response to Babylonian exile in 587 BC. This is a whole group of tribal people. Again, we have this idea Israel is like this huge nation, and they're in control, they have power. But the reality is, Israel was a pretty new, young generation of people, right? This was a young tribe. And this is where, again, you get this idea. Abraham, right? He leaves his father's trade. He goes and he begins his own tribe, right? His own way of living. And Israel is birthed from that. That's the beauty of this telling. We'll get into that story later. But the idea here, Israel's a pretty young nation as far as nations go. And it's a pretty small one. They're mainly a nomadic, tribal people. They are a group of people who are mainly farming. And when I say farming, really they're shepherds, right? They're really shepherds. And so this group, this small group of people, they, like all the other smaller nomadic groups, they are taken basically and taken into captivity into Babylon. And now they're in Babylon, they're going to be expected to assimilate. And so you assimilate because, again, your gods lost to their gods, so you take on their gods, you take on their traditions, you take on their rituals, right? Israel at this moment in time is an interesting nation because they said, we are not going to assimilate. And so the Torah, again, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, these 5 books that we call the Old Testament, Torah, these 5 books, they're a response to assimilation. We're not going to give up our rituals. We're not going to take on their gods. We will keep Jewish. Yeah, makes sense, right? And so the Torah is this beautiful, again, compilation. And it's like the glue that helps Israel stick to their ritual, their identity, their values. It's the thing that helps them keep who they are, right? And so Torah is a complete narrative of Israel miniaturized through its telling. So every time, again, you read the Torah, anytime we read Genesis, whenever you meet a new character, a new leader, remember, Israel is going to be found in its pages. And so today, when we read a novel, right? When we read a novel, we'll often place ourselves in the character. The character's name is Pip, right? But my name's Tony. But the deal is, when you're reading this, you see yourself in the character of Pip. So understand this. When Israel, and I'm referring to Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, but for Israel, when they're reading Genesis, the ancients who wrote these stories, who told these oral tellings, they told them in order for their people to see themselves in the story. They're seeing their nation in the story. And that is the bigger purpose behind it. And so today we're on Genesis 8. And this will be the closing of Genesis 8. And even though there's not that many verses here, there's still a lot of just amazing texture and amazing application you can find here. So we're going to go into it. Reminder here, Noah. They're so similar, right? Noah. Noah is, again, this person who reminds us of like the calm before the storm, right? This is where we're going to find the respite, right? The rest. The character who's going to kind of usher in a sense of calm in the middle of the chaos. So this is literally what the name Noah means. And so the character of Noah, the individual of Noah, has carried his people through the storm, through the divine's guidance. So here we are, Genesis 8:20 through 22, and I'll read it to you now. And Noah built an altar to the Lord, and he took all of the clean animals and all of the clean fowl and brought up burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled the pleasant aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will no longer curse the earth because of man. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will no longer smite all living things as I have done. So long as the earth exists, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So, just within these couple of verses here is packed with so much meaning. So, as we do here at Ethos, we unpack it. We ask questions of it. We look at the words, their meaning. We look at the cultural significance of it. There is so much here. Anytime you look at an ancient piece, right, we ask deeper questions of it because we are in 2021. Boy, that felt weird to say, right? 2021, and there's so many nuances we have today. Understand that back then, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, they had their own nuances. They had their own meanings to words. They had their own cultures and rituals, and words back then had far deeper meaning than they do now. So here we go. And Noah built an altar to the Lord. Now, here's the thing about altars. Every single culture, right? Every single culture had them at that time. And really, historically, you can follow this through all the way up into like the 1800s. We have rituals. And even today, I would argue, we create our own kind of altars. But here's the thing about altars. From Egypt to Incan empires, Roman empires, they all sacrificed animals, food, sometimes depending on which religious, extreme you had, there might even be periods of like human sacrifice, right? Israel even had a couple of periods where they were sacrificing humans. Every tribe had these elements in them. And so the idea was that the gods, they needed to be honored, right? And by honoring the gods, you might receive blessings. And this is just how ancient cultures work. Whether you like it, love it, hate it, it's just the reality of that time period. It's how they saw the world and their gods, right? And so sometimes the sacrifices, they were given in order to like thank their gods for the harvest, right? The good harvest, war victories, the birth of a son, right? Because sons are really important back then. They were important to carry on the lineage. So this is all part of why they sacrificed animals, all these different things. Were their gods literally demanding that they have sacrifices? I think an argument could be made over that one, right? And especially Israel's God. Was Israel's God really demanding that he needs blood to be satisfied, to be honored? Like, does Israel's God really need blood? Maybe it has more to do with the tribe and what they believe at that time than it does about what their God demands and needs. Think about that one. Sit on it. We'll see where that goes. But here we go. So looking at this picture of Israel, right? Israel had, again, they adopted these similar traditions. Again, depending on what era we're looking at, Israel adopted many of these traditions. Even their tabernacle and their temple looked very similar to Egypt's. Right? They had a holy place, the most holy place. All of these different things. Oftentimes they would borrow from each other. Different traditions, rituals. They would oftentimes essentially take them and add them to the values they had. Right? But this is what they did. And so every ancient culture has ritual. And here's the thing, these rituals, the altars, here's the biggest picture for you to understand about rituals with the altars. The altar is going to remind you where you've been and where you're going. It was a benchmark, right? So anytime you looked, you would see this altar over here, or this God's son here, whatever. You would see different rituals and different offerings, but then you would see the altar. And that again reminded you of the rich history you had, the stories that were told. If you go to Washington, D.C., right, you go there and you see all these different monuments. Not many people are going there to worship these monuments, are they? No. They're going there to remember and honor their past. And when we remember and honor our past, the hope is that we might not repeat certain things. The hope is that we might learn from certain things, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. We move forward. But we oftentimes will create monuments and things in order to remember where we've been. And so Israel would create these altars. And it's interesting, archaeologically, we found tons of these altars all over the place. Sometimes they just be like crude rocks and things, and other times they would look like this, right? But they would remind them of their journey, and it was a visual to their own story. It was visually something set up to remind them, this is where we are, this is where we're heading. And it was beautiful. And it reminds me of today, right? Some of you have created vision boards, right? Or you've experienced this weight loss holistic program where you took that first picture and it was hard, right? You took that picture and you got a lot of weight to lose, right? Or you just don't feel healthy. Maybe you took your cholesterol test and you have that, but now you have a starting point, don't you? And for many of us, we've understood the importance of putting that somewhere visually where we can see it, where we can be reminded of it. Because anyone that's ever gone on any of these, like any of these weight loss programs or shifts and changes and turns, you want to remember where you've been. And then you want to keep track of your progress. It's beautiful. It's something that I think oftentimes many of us should do, but we just don't. We get lazy, we forget. But when we remember this, it actually kind of motivates us. In fact, there's a study. There was a study done in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. This study was done by Andrew K. McLeod and some of his peers. And what they did was they took a group of people, split them in half. And they said, look, for you folks over here, we're going to give all of you a goal, but you folks are going to have a visual. And you are going to have your own visuals that you are going to follow. And you're going to keep track of those visuals. Group over here, group B, you will have no visuals. You will have no goal setting, no graphs, none of that stuff, no pie charting, any of that kind of stuff. But you'll have your goal that you're going to try to meet. And what they found was that obviously, most of you probably already figured this out, group A, who kept track of their goals, had visual markers, all of that, they succeeded 85% more than the other group. And then here's the other interesting thing. Group A also had the extra benefits. And here's what blew me away. They had extra benefits of a higher physical health. They had extra benefits of mental health stability that the other group didn't. There were a bunch of interesting things as far as like blood pressure, cholesterol, all those kind of things, all shifted for group A and not for B. And so visually, keeping track of your goals, knowing where you are, where you're going, it is so important, especially if you want to go somewhere, right? Somewhere that's going to bring healing, repair from brokenness, repair from trauma. If you want to get there, you need visuals set up. And I know for me, I need to hear this too. I need to be posting those things for myself because I know it does make a difference. And so it goes on. It says this, and Noah built an altar, and he took all the clean animals and all of the clean fowl and brought up burnt offerings on the altar. Now, here's the thing. If I can change the slide, there we go. For Israel, why a lamb, right? Why a lamb? Why not a goat? You know, and they did do goats, but why not a pig or why not a horse? You know, why the lamb? Why is it always the lamb? Well, here's the simple truth of the matter. Israel is, again, a nomadic group of people, mainly shepherds. And so, want to know why you constantly see the shepherd metaphor, the Israel is a sheep metaphor, wandering, all those kind of things? It's because they're nomadic people, and sheep would have been your main animal that you are eating, you're producing more and more, you're trading with other nations. Sheep. That's what you do, right? Sheep. And so sheep are so important for their culture. And so when they speak of Lamb of God and those things, it's all because it's interconnected to their culture. It makes sense, right? So of course you're going to have sheep. Sheep is the main meat source for this group. And so what are you going to give your God? We're going to give your God the very best of what you have. The clean, white, unblemished sheep, right? Lamb. It makes perfect sense. Now, watch this though. And the Lord smelled the pleasant aroma, Right? And the Lord said to himself, I will no longer curse the earth because of man, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will no longer smite all living things as I have done. So this kind of paints Israel's God as a pretty nasty God, right? Angry God. I will no longer smite you. Wait, why are you smiting them in the beginning if you're a loving God? Right? I will no longer hurt you. I will no longer think of you as evil, bad. What do you do with this? Right? How do you respond to this? If Israel's God is literally love, then what is this saying? How do you interpret this? Well, here's the thing. Often we forget Israel is at this stage in their development. This is where they are. And all the other gods, again, they believed that when there was drought, their gods were unhappy, right? When there was blessing, when there was abundance, then their God must be happy. The truth is, what if mankind continues to change, but the divine doesn't? The divine is always where love is, where compassion is, where restoration is. Think about that one. Yeah. What if it's mankind that continues to change and be shaped from their understandings of the world, right? And so at this point in time, this is how they view the world, and this is how they view their God. And so, of course, this is how they would view and tell the story of how their God might interact with them. Now I'm no longer going to send floods because I'm not angry with you anymore, right? I'll no longer do that anymore. It would make sense. Now, take it literal, take it metaphorical, however you will. But here's the thing. After the flood experience, right? After the Babylonian captivity, they experience a growth, right? A time of blessing. This happens over and over again. And this is really what's happening here in the story. They're telling their story, right? After the brokenness, after the captivity, they experience growth, restoration, tikkun olam, healing of the world. They experience something positive after just a hellish era. And that's the idea here. That's what happens. So again, I think all of us get this. We all understand this. After the trauma, right? After the trauma, there's potential for healing. You do the therapy. You get connected to others who have been through it. You move through it, and there is light at the end, right? You go through an ugly, painful divorce. It's bad. It's ugly. You move through it. There's going to be life on the other side. You go through the shift, the breakdown, whatever the thing is, and there comes a time of healing and repair. And I think all of us have experienced that in some way. If we're willing to move through it after the thing has collapsed, we then have the beautiful job, right? The opportunity to rebuild. And I think rebuilding is really fun. Rebuilding is the time where there's so much possibility and change and shifts. You get to rebuild, you get to grow. And it's hard work, but it's work, and it's good work. I think this is what Israel here is able to do in the story. Now they get to rebuild. Now they get to all the opportunity, all the change. It's all a possibility in front of them. And they get to reimagine what the world is going to look like now that they're free. This is the story of Israel right here in the story of Noah. Let me keep going. So long as the earth exists, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. Now, here's what you may not know. Israel, we see seasons, right? Summer, winter, right? Summer, fall, winter, spring. We go back into summer again. We have these different seasons. For Israel, they had different seasons as well. They had really 6 main seasons. Bet you didn't know that. Yeah. Israelites had 6 seasons, and they often paired them together. They would pair them together, and I'll share with you what that meant. This comes from Rashi. And again, Rashi was one of these great Jewish rabbis. And here's what he said about those seasons and the pairs and what they actually meant to Israel. So they had seed time and harvest, right? They're paired. And that would make sense. You plant the seeds and then you harvest the seeds. Here's what he says about it. And again, I find it so beautiful. It's a beautiful perspective on who Israel is, but also an application for us. So look at this. These two coinciding seasons remind us toil leads to fruit. There is no harvest if there is no work. I should say if. Work pays off. If you put in the work, the fruits are there. The fruits of your labor can be experienced. If you're not willing to put in the work, then you're not going to see any result, right? And so the two go hand in hand. And for Israel, it was a constant reminder, if we want something in life, we work for it, right? We work hard for it, and we then enjoy the fruits of our labor. During harvest time is when you have some of the most fun, beautiful rituals and traditions where they get to enjoy the harvest. They dance, they drink, they eat, they're merry, right? It's all part of the journey. You got to work if you want to enjoy the fruits of your work. Makes sense. The two go hand in hand. Another one is this: winter and summer. Yeah, we've seen those, right? Winter and summer. Winter and summer, birth and death, are the great balancers of life. When we learn to accept both, we are enabled to live more fully now. So often we live in this culture where we're terrified of death. And so we constantly live in this fear and anxiety whereas Israel was saying, look, Hebrew people, we have to learn to dance with it, right? We're in the middle of it. We're in between these two trees, right? We're living in this time period, and each moment has meaning and beauty and value. And so it's what we do with the time we have. And death gives life more meaning and texture. Again, if I lived on forever, these moments, these breaths, these steps, these minutes that we have, they would not be as powerfully gifts to us anymore, would they? It would just be another, I've got more time. But what they're saying is death gives life meaning. And so winter and summer, we learn to embrace them all. And then here's the other season that Israel found themselves in. And they called it, again, very, very ancient, not pretty simplistic, right? They called it the hot and the cold, right? The cold and the hot. These are two extremes. These are the two extremes. So in the middle of winter, some of us, we know this, right? When you have lived in Michigan, winter is nice. It's cute for the first month. But then you hit the cold of winter and you're hitting like 0 degrees, sometimes negative 10 degrees. It's cold. That's cold. That's not winter wonderland fun, is it? No. And then it's summers. Some of you know this. Like if you're in Florida, right, with the humidity and you walk out for 5 minutes outside and you're drenched in sweat, that's hot, right? Arizona, hot, right? It's cute in the beginning when it's warm and things are nice, but when it's hot, it's hot. There are extremes in life we go through as well. And Israel also understood this. And so Rashi says this: cold, being the most severe of wintertime, was its own season, much like hot to summer. These were not the seasons. These were the seasons of extremes. We sometimes experience severe pain. It is not to be avoided, but learn to walk through gracefully. We don't always live in extremes, do we? But sometimes they come up. Sometimes we do deal with something really, really awful. And again, we don't look for those things, right? They're not the norm, but they do happen. And when they happen, Israel would say, look, they happen. What do we do now? Right? What do we do now after the pain, after the brokenness? How do we move through it? We don't ignore it. We ask ourselves some questions of it. And then we learn to walk through it and we find wholeness there. But sometimes you move through extremes and it's so hard. And so all in all, this chapter, again, it was so short, right? A couple verses, but there's so much depth to it when you understand the deeper meaning, which is what we do here every single week. And so again, for Israel, learning to move through these seasons, learning to understand how to incorporate visual altars in their lives was so important for their own growth, their own stability, their own journey. And so today for our take at home, what I want to do is I want to talk about creating visual benchmarks. And I read about three different sources to find interesting concepts for this, and I'm going to practice this as well this week. Moving forward, as I continue on my own health journey, eating better, exercising better, I'm going to try incorporating these as well. And so the first step that I thought was really an interesting one was this one, really easy. It said this: sit quietly and set the intent. Now that sounds really airy, right? Like, what do you do with this? It sounds almost too meditative. Here's the idea: reflect on your past. For me, I've always been this yo-yo dieter and exerciser. I'll be really great for a couple of years and then I'll go down. And so, what I'm going to do this week, I'm going to reflect over my own journey, where I've been, how I got there, the ups and the downs, consider what worked, what didn't work. And here's what you might do too. You might take time to do the same. Consider what has worked, what didn't work. When was I feeling the very best in my life, spiritually, mentally, physically? What things were going on at that point in my life? And then those points were just trenches, right? What was going on during that time? Mentally, physically, emotionally, all of those things, spiritually, what was going on then? Look over your past, reflect on it, right? Set an intention to really consider where you have been in the past. The next one was write down the main successes you've experienced. So for me, I might look back and say, you know what? In those moments where I felt the very best, in those moments that I had the very best success with weight loss or health wise or spiritually, I was just so connected. What was I doing? Was I waking up and reading? Was my meditation life and prayer life, was that just happening all the time? What was going on there? What was the community like I was a part of? All of those things are really important for that. Taking time to write down, and again, simply writing them down basically allows us to see them again. Sometimes it feels like the first time. Oh, I wasn't even aware that was happening. It almost makes it more real for us when we actually see it written down on a page or typed out on a page. The third one is this: capture them in images. Once you have that down, right? Once I know, oh man, I was running every day, right? I'm gonna capture some kind of image of someone running, or maybe a sneaker, whatever it is. I'm gonna capture that image, because that image for me is gonna cause me to consider things, and I'm gonna see it, and I'm gonna immediately, oh, there's my shoe. There's a picture of that runner. It's going to put that into action for me. It's going to make me see it visually, which is going to cause me to have to shift and take action. So create an image, right? For Israel, they were always doing this with their different altars, constantly writing down different ways in which where they've been, where they're going. The altars were that place. What would your altar look like for you? For fitness, the visual reminder, spirituality, all of those things. What would the visual thing look like? And then lastly, put that image somewhere you'll see it, right? So if you want to create a collage, right? Or, put up three, I'm going to go spiritually, mentally, physically, right? I'm going to have three images somewhere where I'm going to see them daily. So maybe you create a collage. Maybe you have pictures. When you wake up, you see them there and you remind yourself, wherever they are, put that image somewhere where you're going to see it. Because when you do, all the writers I'm reading right now say when you do that, when you wake up to it, when you see it throughout the day, it's going to cause you to have to shift, and you basically are going to be forced to see your own goals set before you. You're going to be reminded of your past, your present, and your future. Make it a visual thing you see constantly. Israel did it in their own journey. Maybe try it in yours as well. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this. And again, as always, please consider giving to Ethos, again, church.org/donate. This is tax-deductible donations. We would love to continue to get your support here. And Ethos Living Rooms, we've continued to do this, and it is so much fun. So many people have not had a chance to go to a spiritual community where they can connect and have discussions. We don't have a sermon. We actually discuss things. And so we'll ask questions. I'll post conversation. We go through a topic together, and man, we don't always agree on everything, but it is so fun to go through a process with other people, asking questions, going deeper. We do this typically on the 1st and the 3rd of the month, every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. Let me know if that's an interest to you. Email me at tonywerfel@gmail.com and I will send you the Zoom link. Or go to our website at Ethos-Church and we'll make sure to get you on the newsletter. And as always, hit that subscribe button and you'll know every time a new video comes out. Everyone, we love you. Thanks so much for joining us here at Ethos. We'll see you next week.